Welcome to the newest episode, a midweek edition of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's video, we have some interesting news on the charters front from an in-depth article in The Athletic that had one particular thing in there that totally fascinates me. Also, we'll cover how a well-known NASCAR sponsor brought up a controversial topic this week and effectively put an end to that controversy. Plus, in this week's By the Numbers segment, I take a look at Noah Gragson's surprising start to 2024 and how it compares to other drivers in the series, including the one he replaced. Plus, we'll take a look at the stage points earned so far this year, and there's one name that I think you might find surprising. However, before we get to all of that, I wanted to first talk about a couple of news items over the last 24 hours. Let's start with the news that Shane Van Gisbergen will not be competing in this year's All-Star race at North Wilkesboro. According to Racer magazine, the New Zealander, who earned a berth in this month's race after winning on the streets of Chicago last year, will not be competing because Trackhouse and Colleague Racing will not field an entry for him. When I first heard the news, I thought it was a bummer, because I know after last year's win, there was a lot of interest internationally in SVG's win and what he might do with NASCAR in the future. Now he's here competing in the Xfinity Series full-time, but has a chance to race in the non-points paying Cup event and would certainly attract more international attention. While sponsorship will likely be used as an excuse for it not to happen, it's really hard for me to believe that Matt Colleague and Justin Marks couldn't put together some kind of one-off deal. I also learned later on Facebook that I'm not the only one who's not happy that SVG won't be racing in North Wilkesboro. Mark Martin wasn't either, by his comment. "This is a real shame," he noted. Yes, it is, Mark. Moving on to last night's NASCAR Race Hub and the always entertaining radioactive part of the show. I enjoy listening to that particular segment each week because it provides some insight into what teams are talking about during the race, and as you know, much of the time the conversations get spicy because they're frustrated and dealing with some sort of issue. Some drivers make appearances more often than others. Looking at you, Ryan Blaney. But last night, there was a surprise appearance from Alex Bowman. If you saw Sunday's broadcast, you heard a snippet of his heated conversation with spotter Kevin Hamlin. Turns out, there was more to it than what we saw in the race. Take a listen.
Why do we keep going bottom? Like, is he trying to save tires? We get our asses kicked off at 2 when he does it. Much appreciated, 5-car. He's not going to pull over for you. You got to go earn it. Let's go. Evan, dude, let me drive the race car. Whining about a teammate racing him for the win. Like, shut the up and drive it. He's our guy, man.
Those last words were from crew chief Blake Harris, obviously standing up for his driver, which is weird for me to say considering that was his team radio. Something tells me there was a conversation about that radio conversation this week at HMS headquarters. Speaking of HMS, Jeff Gordon has been front and center for the organization when it comes to negotiations with NASCAR over the past couple of years. The Hall of Famer has been joined by 23XI Racing investor Curtis Polk, Joe Gibbs Racing President Dave Alpern, and Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing President Steve Newmark as representatives for the Race Team Alliance, a coalition of NASCAR teams, in working with NASCAR on negotiations on a new revenue-sharing model. In February, before the Daytona 500, the principal owners of all the 15 charter teams met and invited NASCAR officials to attend. They declined. According to the latest article by Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi at The Athletic, which I encourage everyone to read, the policy of not meeting with the RTA and its members as a group has continued, with NASCAR Chairman and CEO Jim France meeting with individual teams who have been willing to accept one-on-one invitations and avoid the RTA. The story reported that teams have 4 pillars that it wants NASCAR to address, including increased revenue to help support team operations, giving the teams a voice in NASCAR decisions to avoid unexpected cost increases, share of revenue in future business, and permanent charters. That last item was covered in great detail. Polk, who has been Michael Jordan's longtime business partner, delivered some pretty eye-opening quotes about charters in the story, including, "We're basically tenants in an apartment building. We have these charters and they give us certain rights, and we have responsibilities because of the rights they give us. But at a date certain, which right now is December 31st, 2024, we have no further rights to renew, and the charters could be taken away from us. Could you imagine if Jerry Jones had to periodically renew his Cowboys franchise? How would you want to invest long-term in a venture like that? Would you invest the kind of money that gets invested in these other sports if you were a tenant who didn't have rights after a certain date? While the article said NASCAR officials are confident a deal will get done, the teams who have met with France have provided an unsettling picture of what might happen and suggest there might be a take-it-or-leave-it type of offer from NASCAR in the future. And it's unclear what the outcome might be if the teams don't all agree. At this point, it's uncertain what the sanctioning body would even offer because they're not communicating that info to the RTA, which had been sharing details with the teams. Here's something else from Polk. I would hope that will give all the teams comfort in knowing whether they feel they're big or small, important or minor in the scheme of cup racing. Their fellow teams are really fighting it out here and have all said they will not sign a charter agreement unless everybody is treated the same way. The question is, will Polk's words even matter? Will NASCAR's divide and conquer approach work? I'm hopeful that this all gets worked out. That's the optimist in me. But this whole thing does make me feel uneasy. There is no agreement, and as much as everyone says there will be one, I'm not going to believe it until everyone has signed it. And one final note from that story, and the fascinating part that I mentioned in the intro. The article talked about the differences between the top teams and the lower teams and their differing spending habits. Here's one example. Although teams buy parts from the same supplier, many will buy more than necessary and scan them for small disparities. Then they will use the best ones in a race and sit on the rest. Talk about trying to find any and all possible advantages. Super interesting stuff. Sticking with another topic that makes fans uncomfortable, I wanted to touch on what a sponsor had to say this week about the numbers on the side of the Gen 7 car and their move forward when the car debuted in 2022. There was a ton of pushback and fans up in arms because in their eyes, moving the numbers forward was a terrible idea. Dale Jr. was one of the most vocal opponents to the move. Well, on Monday, Vice President of Kroger Racing Paul Zendrick addressed the subject on social media, suggesting that the partner brands are loving the number changes on the cars, and the data shows that moving the number forward has been beneficial to the sponsors. Honestly, those are the first remarks I've heard from a sponsor on moving the numbers. But I think they're really important because they effectively end any argument of going back to the old style. And Junior admitted as much on his Tuesday podcast.
And I remember when they moved the numbers forward, I was so angry about it, so frustrated with it. It's working for some sponsors. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, if it wasn't, why'd we do it? But hey, it's working.
Speaking of numbers, it's time for this week's By the Numbers segment, where I take a look at some interesting numbers and trends in the Cup Series. Just a reminder, if you want to further explore these numbers yourselves, please go check it out at stube.com. After finishing 6th on Sunday for his second consecutive top 10 finish and 4th of 2024, I wanted to take a little closer look at Noah Gragson and how the number 10 car has stacked up against other competition through the first 11 races. Before I compared him to the current drivers, I wanted to see how the 25-year-old measured up to his predecessor in the number 10 car, Aric Almirola. Surprisingly, it's not even close. Through the first 11 races in 2023, the veteran had a single top 10, 2 finishes in the teens, and 5 finishes of 30th or worse for an average finishing position of 23.7. This season, Gragson has those 4 top 10s, 2 inside the top 5, and 3 finishes of 30th or worse for an average finishing position of 17.3. Definitely an improvement in the number 10 car in 2024. Against current competition, Gragson's performance has been equally impressive. It's arguable that Gragson is the best at Stewart-Haas racing, with Chase Briscoe his closest competition, recording 4 top 10s of his own but no top 5s, 1 finish higher than 30th, and an average finishing position of 14.7. Outside of SHR, Gragson's 17.3 average finishing position this year is the same as two-time champion Joey Logano and better than Bubba Wallace at 17.9, Daniel Suarez at 18.3, Christopher Bell at 19.4, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at 23.6, and Michael McDowell at 25 even. Our next number to tackle is stage top 10 finishes. I like this stat because I think it's a good indicator of how a team is running throughout a race. Those who are consistently running up front will finish inside the top 10 at stage conclusions more often than others. When it comes to drivers recording double-digit numbers in top 10 results at the stage end, the list is short. Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr. are tied at the top with 15 each, followed by Chase Elliott alone at 14, with three drivers, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, and William Byron, tied at 13. The list is rounded out by Tyler Reddick at 12 and his 2311 racing teammate Bubba Wallace with 11. The number 23 team is somewhat of a surprise, but it does speak to the whole organization consistently having fast cars. When looking at how those stage finishes translate into points, Kyle Larson and his 6 stage wins have him way out in front with 126 points compared to Truex and his 91. An interesting little tidbit of info is Larson's 126 stage points are more than the total points accumulated by Zane Smith with 99, Justin Haley and his 115, although to be fair, he was DQ'd at COTA, and just 2 shy of Harrison Burton's total of 128. Yikes! And finally, our last set of numbers I want to take a look at are a stat that I never really see talked about in NASCAR, but I know is something that is regularly covered in other sports, and that's what a team has done recently. So again, thanks to Stu.com, who has provided all these graphics, we have a great idea of who has done what over the last 5 races. Chase Elliott got his first win of 2024 and snapped his 42-race winless streak at Texas. That trip to victory lane was the highlight in the last 5 races where the HMS driver has been the best in the business, with an impressive 4 top 5s in that time, including a 3rd at Martinsville and a pair of 5th-place finishes at Richmond and Dover. Unsurprisingly, with his consistent high finishes, Elliott leads the way in average finishing position for all drivers at 5.8. While Chase Elliott has been at the top of the field in average finishing position during the last 5 races, Tyler Reddick is running a very close second at 6.6. The 2311 racing driver has actually been more consistent than his HMS counterpart during that time, with 5 finishes of 11th or better. Elliott's worst finish was a 15th at Talladega. The number 45 team has 4 top 10s in the last 5, including a 4th place result at Texas and his first win of the year at Talladega. In third behind Reddick is Kyle Larson at 9.8 with 3 top 5s, including a pair of runner-up finishes at Martinsville and Dover, plus a 3rd at Richmond. The 2021 champ's average number is inflated because of his pair of 21st place finishes in back-to-back races at Texas and Talladega. And rounding out the top 5 in average finishing position over the last 5 races are Martin Truex Jr. at 10 and William Byron at 10.2. Truex, who currently has the best average finishing position through the first 11 races at 9.4, has been consistent in that span like he has all season, his worst finish in the last 5 races and worst result of the year, an 18th at Martinsville. He's recorded 2 top 5s, a 4th at Richmond, and 3rd at Dover. In the latest 5-race snapshot, Byron was really good in those first 4 events, including a pair of 7th place finishes at Richmond and Talladega, bookending a win at Martinsville and a 3rd place at Texas. Unfortunately, the number 24 team's day ended early at Dover after being collected in a crash with Bubba Wallace and Christopher Bell, and finished 33rd, which dramatically altered his result. In total, that's 3 HMS Chevrolets and 2 Toyotas, one each from Joe Gibbs Racing and 2311 Racing. Rounding out the top 10 are Joey Logano at 10.8, followed by Noah Gragson at 11.8, Chase Briscoe at 13.0, Brad Keselowski at 13.2, and Alex Bowman at 15 even. And let's take a look at the bottom of our graphic, and it's a painful look for a couple of teams. Christopher Bell is already locked into the 2024 Cup playoffs with his win at Phoenix. But a quick glance at his last 5 races and average finishing position of 26.0 suggests he's anything but a title contender. He started at Richmond with a solid 6th place finish. Since then, it's been disastrous. and not necessarily of his own doing, including his involvement in the crash with Wallace and Byron at Dover. Over the last 4 races, the JGR driver has 3 finishes of 34th or worse, including his 34th at Dover, which was preceded by a 35th at Martinsville and a 38th at Talladega. He finished 17th at Texas. Bell isn't alone. After starting the season with a pair of top 10s in the first 4 races, Michael McDowell has cooled off considerably, with an average finishing position at the bottom of the 36-car field at 29.8. In the last 5 races, all the front-row motorsports drivers' finishes are 21st or worse, including the last 3 results in the 30s, Texas 35th, Talladega 31st, and Dover 36th. While Bell and McDowell's results clearly aren't good, the last 5 races don't define a team season. Just like Elliott and Reddick aren't going to take their feet off the gas because they've done well in each one in the last 5 races. It's the ebb and flow of a 36-race season, and why there's always hope for every team of at least getting a win until that final checkered flag in Phoenix. All right, gang, that's a wrap on this episode. There's a lot to discuss. What do you think about SVG not racing in the All-Star race? What do you think about Alex Bowman's heated conversation with his spotter? And I really want to hear what you have to say about the charter negotiations. Are you concerned? Do you think this gets worked out? And finally, I want your thoughts on our By the Numbers segment. Are there any numbers in particular that surprised you? And by the way, I'm always open to ideas for analyzing other areas. If you have an idea, drop a comment and we just might look into it. Remember, if you want to read my written work, go check it out at heavy.com and beatingandbanging.com, where you can also sign up for my weekly newsletter and you'll receive an email each Friday recapping the top stories from the week, including reviews of the various NASCAR-related podcasts. Also, make sure to check out my Beating and Banging podcast on the Bluewire network. There's a link in the description. Thanks as always for supporting the channel and have a great rest of your day.